Well, I hope nobody's going to be surprised to hear that I'm going to argue that part of the reason why crime has fallen is to do with the police. And I do genuinely believe that. But before I say a little bit about that, when I was thinking about this problem, I was thinking in terms of, theories about why crime happens. And I put them into two general kind of groups. One is structural theories, and we've talked a little bit about that, the economy, demographics, that sort of thing. Another is what I might call environmental. And a very kind of simple theory, which underpins a lot of policing, is sort of work that Felsen did around routine activity theory. That actually a crime occurs when you've got a suitable target, you've got a motivated offender, and there's the absence of a capable guardian. And my argument would be that you can target harden, you can do work with offenders, certainly with other agencies of offenders, and I would argue that the police can be very effective, capable guardians. Before I go on to talking a bit about policing, one thing that I had a slightly different point than Mike had in terms of just a general way of explanation. I do think there's something in young people indulging in less risky behaviour now, and I do think that's worthy of looking at. And I brigaded three things which you'd slightly brigaded differently. I think, I'm very aware of the statistics on alcohol, very aware of drug use statistics, and that's borne out as well when we do our testing. This is of young offenders who are coming in when they're arrested for trigger offences, and we do the tests. Actually, the percentage that are testing positive for drugs is a lot lower now than it was 10 years ago when we started doing it. And the other thing, I do think there is something about youngsters staying inside more, and what you call the Xbox issue. 2 or 3 reasons for that. If you look at Thames Valley, the occurrences of antisocial behaviour are down quite a lot in the last 2 or 3 years. Criminal damage is down more than a lot of the other offences. And then this is completely anecdotal, I know, but I was with a group of about 8 schools with young people who were talking about community safety about 6 weeks ago. And we were talking about these issues, and they were saying, we stay in more. That was their kind of perception, that you don't go out to hang around as much. You effectively you hang around on the internet, I guess. It's kind of cyber hanging around rather than hanging around street corners. But I think it's worthy probably of some proper research rather than my anecdotes. In terms of, I'm very pleased, having heard what Richard said, that I haven't chosen to use overall crime figures, but I thought I'd just pick out 4 of the main crime types in the Thames Valley, just over the 5 years, and you can see this is reported crime, what is happening. And give you some kind of thoughts of mine about what we've been doing and why that might be. The top line is violence. That's violence against the person with injury. So that's most of the violence categories. Gone from over 14,000 to just over 8,000 in 5 years. I think a lot of that is about much greater degree of organisation, particularly around the nighttime economy, the amount of partnership work that goes on with the pubs, with the local authorities, with voluntary groups like Street Angels and all the people from the churches who go out in Oxford City Centre, Windsor City Centre, to work with us on a Friday and Saturday night. It's about the visibility of officers. In Thames Valley, it's been a kind of key strategy that in all the savings we've made, we've not cut the number of officers on patrol or neighbourhood teams. We've in fact trebled the numbers of special constables. So there's actually more visible policing in those areas which were the hotspots in terms of violence. So I think some of that is down to crime, but I think this kind of idea about risky behaviour is also worthy of examination. The next line down is domestic burglary, gone down from 11,000 to about 7,000. I think A, it is harder to get into houses. B, there is the issue about why would anybody buy a second-hand telly when somebody could shoplift one from Tesco's or do some sort of fraudulent kind of internet offence. There just isn't the market for shoddy second-hand goods nowadays. The other thing, I do think there's work, which underpins all of these categories, actually the bottom 3. The work that's been done around integrated offender management, working with probation, really focusing on cohorts of young people who are habitually offending and seeing what can be done to help them stop. And drug treatment is part of that as well, I think had an effect on all these acquisitive crime types in the bottom half of the chart. And linked to that, I do think there's a link to sentencing. One of our big issues is about trying to persuade our burglars to have offences taken into consideration. And they're very loath to do it now because they know the judges will be pretty harsh if there's a load of burglary offences is on the indictments. Third line down is theft of vehicle. That's been covered vehicles are a lot harder to steal, but also automatic number plate recognition, which I was going to talk about in a minute. You know, our ability to track vehicles once they're stolen. You know, if you're going to steal a car, you've certainly got to go on different plates pretty quickly. And in fact, the most vulnerable point of a car is not when somebody comes and tries to take it on the street. It's when they take the car keys from taking them through the letterbox. Most of those thefts of cars, or if not most, the vast majority, will be because thieves have got a little kind of metal instrument for taking the car keys, which we all keep the other side of the letterbox, don't we, handy by the front door. And then that's the most vulnerable point, really. That's how the car gets stolen, in effect. They take the keys from inside the house and then drive away very nicely. But as you can see, car crime down really substantially. That's theft of cars. And the last one, personal robbery, down from about 2,000 a year to just over 1,000 a year. And I think my comments about offender management and that focus on that small cohort of offenders who commit a disproportionate amount of crime is key to that. So slightly different explanations across the categories, but I think some common themes. And then I was just having a kind of a bit of a brainstorm here about what I think we've done differently in policing. This probably is over the last sort of 10 or 15 years. That point about focused leadership, I don't think should be underestimated. Technology enables us to deal with crime in a very different way, in terms of looking at the patterns of crime, being able to crunch quite large data sets, looking at vulnerable hotspots over time, the whole kind of analysis about identifying where the risk is, whether that's in terms of location or in terms of victims, and making sure that there are strategies and you task your assets and resource according to risk, I think shouldn't be underestimated. It is a million miles away from the police service that I joined 27 years ago. Similarly, science helps us. I've got DNA there, and automatic number plate recognition I've mentioned. These technologies do help us to solve crime, and I'm with the comment about that there is a relationship, I am certain, between detection and reduction. So technology, professionalisation and specialism, I think, I've talked a little bit about risk management. We are getting better at using the evidence about what works. There's still a long way to go, but I do think the whole professionalisation agenda in policing helps enormously in terms of reducing crime. And money. This couple here, the extra investment bonds, both counter-terrorism and neighbourhood policing, are particular areas of policing which over the last 10 years have been had additional resources. Neighbourhood policing, I guess, is the most appropriate to this particular discussion, but that visibility on the streets and the preventative role that those officers and the police community support officers, I mean, we have in Thames Valley still over 500 police community support officers who are all out doing neighbourhood policing, and that gives you a huge amount of visibility which you wouldn't have with police officers. And lastly, what else have I got there? Intelligence sharing, and I will mention partners. It's not just the police on our own, whether it's working with local authorities, whether it's working with our children's services or community safety departments, a huge amount of intelligence sharing, and even with the health service now around, where are those risky locations, what can we do in terms of joined up strategies. So I would argue very strongly that I think the figures are reliable. I think the fact that BCS and police recorded figures have tended to track each other over many, many years can give us some confidence. And while I would accept there are lots of structural explanations, I do think better and more effective policing has made a difference.